Welcome back to Specter of Torment. Last time we went through the Exploratorium and the Lich Yard, taking on Plague Knight and the Phantom Striker, though we couldn't quite recruit the Phantom Striker because he's a goody two-shoes hero and he doesn't want anything to do with the Order of No Quarter, except probably try and defeat them at some point. Instead, in his place at the buffet table, we have the Super Skeleton pretending to be the Phantom Striker, as he pretended to be Specter Knight in, Specter Knight's room area. Because we defeated the Phantom Striker in the Lich Yard, the broccoli-headed dancer lady appears. I don't know what connection she has with the Lich Yard, and there was a hero guarding it before, so I don't know why she's so happy at the fact that we defeated said hero. But she's gonna try and show us a dance she so generously choreographed and performs. But Specter Knight isn't having any of that. He's not gonna watch any happy-looking dance. He's too edgy for that. I agree with you, man. I like my edge in my video games. Give me a Shadow the Hedgehog or a Meta Knight. I suppose this is the reason as to why she pretty much holds a grudge against Specter Knight later on in Shovel of Hope's campaign, because she does request that you defeat Specter Knight in that campaign, and then after you do so, she gives you like a music sheet and does a little dance for you. In this campaign, though, we get the cold shoulder from her. Basically, if you hold down for a little while, Specter Knight will take a cool, edgy-looking pose, which garners the respect of everyone around him, including the Edge Farmer. A neat little touch for the Edge Farmer is that, as you might know, he has a sort of Cockney accent, and the way he spells Specter Knight is with an R-E at the end instead of E-R, which is kinda neat, I guess. You might notice that in the rest of the campaign, they do spell it E-R, because I'm playing on the US version of the game. Something cool about the Fairy of Chivalry, at least in this campaign, is that when you perform your special action, he'll actually copy you. So he'll, stand on the ground with his wings flowing behind him, as Specter Knight's cloak does. And that's pretty neat. He doesn't copy Plague Knight's dance in Plague of Shadows, at least I don't recall him doing that. So it's a nice little touch for this campaign. After defeating the Phantom Striker, we unlock the Skeletal Sentry Curio. Basically, you press the Curio button and you throw a skeleton behind you. The skeleton can can shoot projectiles 3 at a time, and once it shoots 6 projectiles in all, it'll disappear. However, if you press the Curio button again while it's already out, the skeleton will actually explode. The radius of the explosion isn't that great, at least at this point it isn't. Once you upgrade it via Legion, the radius will be about as big as the Big Boom from Specter Knight's campaign. Did I say Specter Knight? I meant Plague Knight. I am fumbling up my words a little too much. I'm not going to be getting any other armors right now. I'll save that for after I've beat the next stage. What I am going to do now, though, is upgrade my curios. I'll be upgrading the throwing sickle. In its upgraded form, it can pass through walls as well as enemies and also recover gold for you. And I'm going to be upgrading the skeletal sentry. Along with having a larger explosion, it can also shoot more projectiles, instead shooting 5 at a time instead of the 3 it did before. And 2 of those projectiles are going to be going in an upwards diagonal fashion. When you do the cold shoulder pose, hearts start appearing over the skeletal sentry's head, which is a pretty nice detail. Again, Specter Knight enthralls all with his cold shoulder. And I'm not going to be visiting the Iron Whale right now. I'm going for the Last Darkness Wisp in Tinker Knight's stage. Tinker Knights and Propeller Knights are the stages that have the most reward for beating them. Both of them give you 3,000 gold upon defeating the recruit in that stage. So that means I'm going after one of the hardest stages in the game right now. But because I have my Raiment of Risk, it actually isn't that hard. And again, the game does give you the option to go to any stage at any point, so you might want to do one of these stages early on, maybe to get them out of the way, maybe because you want the Darkness Wisp that's in Tinker Knight stage. A cool new mechanic in Tinker Knight stage is these Tinker Wizard guys. I don't know exactly what they're called. But as before, they shoot out projectiles that look like gears. If you slash at one of those gears, it'll rise into the air, and once it's in the air, if you jump, you can use it as a target for one of your dash slashes, which is a pretty cool method of using an enemy for basically platforming. There is another enemy that you can kind of do that with that is featured in one of the challenges. It's the beetle enemies that appear in the very first stage of the game. As you might know, just slashing at them with your shovel or scythe doesn't actually kill them, it instead makes them rise into the air a little bit. And the focus of that challenge is to get that beetle all the way to the end of the stage so that you can finally dash slash onto it and get to the goal post, or goal checkpoint, whatever the heck you want to call it. One of the things I wanted to talk about last part, but I didn't really get to, was the power scales, I guess you could call it, of this game. Specter Knight is able to defeat pretty much every member of the Order of No Quarter, besides himself, obviously, because he's not going to be fighting himself. He is himself. Although that didn't stop anyone in Plague of Shadows, because Plague Knight did end up fighting the boss version of Plague Knight. Either way, Specter Knight's pretty dang strong, able to defeat Plague Knight, who defeated him in Plague of Shadows, and also defeated the Enchantress, I guess? It's kind of weird. If Plague Knight's story is to be taken as part of the canon and not just an alternate take on the original campaign, then that means Plague Knight is the one who defeated the Enchantress, at least maybe weakened her so that Shovel Knight could defeat her, which would mean that Shovel Knight probably isn't all that strong, but he was able to defeat Plague Knight. Even in Plague Knight's campaign, he could defeat Plague Knight, because in those boss fights with the Shovel Knight, he doesn't actually, lose. He just gets knocked down for a little bit and then surprises you with a charge attack, which is very cheap. But nobody ever said, well, actually, I'm pretty sure everybody said that Shovel Knight is a hero. Either way, here is the Darkness Wisp, the final Darkness Wisp in this game, raising our max bar to 5 chunks. And of course, we are going to be going back into a flashback scene later on, and because we have so many chunks, we're going to have a lot of item. That's pretty much all I can call it. I guess magic, I could also say. We're going to have a lot of magic in that flashback scene, and probably not a lot of health, because your will and darkness correlate to your life and item in the flashback scenes. And there's the Fairy of Chivalry defying all physics, just standing in midair. I find that kind of entertaining. These gears here, you do not want to touch them, especially when you have the Raiment of Risk activated, because they do take a full dot of health, which is 25% of my health at this point. That's kind of a lot. These are some new enemies, these weird dog-like contraptions that either fly vertically or horizontally depending on where they're positioned initially. If they're on walls, they're gonna fly horizontally, and if they're on the floor or the ceiling, they'll fly vertically. They take a couple of hits to take down, though as you might have seen previously, I actually took advantage of the screen in order to make one fly all the way up to the top and then disappear on the top barrier. On this section right here, I found myself dying a lot in my initial run of the game. I know I said that I didn't really have any problems with dash slashing and slashing in general, but I ended up slashing one of those fairies, or at least trying to slash one of those fairies, and I didn't know that it was actually a dash slash that I would be performing, so I dash slashed right into the spikes. And that was a one-time thing, never happens again. I think, and I hope, I don't recall it ever happening again. When I was playing this, like recording it, I was kind of missing the curio that I used the most in my initial few runs through this campaign. It's the one you get for defeating, I think, Treasure Knight? I think that might be it. And it's essentially a panic button that you could use to allow yourself to get out of pretty much any sticky situation. I'm trying to be as vague as possible with my description of it here. And not having it here kind of made things a little more complicated than they probably needed to be. But I did want to get all the darkness wisps first, so I gotta deal with it. Especially in this bit right here with that gear. It was quite difficult to do for some reason without that extra curio. I have a bit of a tale about this specific red skull here. In my initial run of the game, this was actually a special red skull, which we are going to be seeing later. Rather than being just a normal one, it had a weird kind of veil around its head, which obviously signifies that it's more important, but this time through the game, it actually didn't have that. The amount of red skulls that you get will actually change, I guess, when that special red skull is going to appear. I think it's based on a certain amount of red skulls that you've collected. So if you have like 82 in all, then your 83rd one is going to be a special red skull or something like that. So you don't need to get all of them in order to satiate red. That's what I'll say for now. But you do need to get all of them if you want to get every last item in this game. There is a special reward for collecting all 100, kind of like with the Pandemonium Chalice and Cloak with Plague Knight's campaign. Although, the reward for getting all 100 in this campaign is a lot more cosmetic than crazy and sometimes useful, sometimes very detrimental. That was kind of an odd sentence. I think I should have ended it with the actual name of the cloak. But whatever. Here's pretty much the last section of the stage. Of course, a huge vertical section, as is what happens in Tinker Knight stage. Another instance of me being very panicky because my TV doesn't like showing 720p without, you know, the edges being cut off. If I do, you know, I keep saying a lot, you know. Basically, edges don't show when I have it on 1080p. 720p, my TV is kind of weird like that, and I don't want to reduce the screen size because I feel like it'll do something to the capture, so I don't do anything to it. And thus, I'm cut off in all of the edges of the screen. It's not too big of a deal, but it can mess me up, I guess I could say. And here's the boss, Tinker Knight. He is a lot more competent than in the other campaigns. He actually starts out the fight by getting on the mobile gear, which you actually collect as Plague Knight or Shovel Knight. And it is quite different from in those other two campaigns. For example, that big towering spike thing that it can do. That was not a function that I heard about when I got it from Chester. And, of course, since Tinker Knight doesn't go down that easily, it can actually fly somehow. I don't know how he's able to do this. I don't know why he lost it in his own tower, but I kind of wish that Shovel Knight was able to use it as effectively as he can. As for the boss fight itself, this would be a lot easier with that curio I keep mentioning, but since we don't have it, we'll have to make do with what we got. Basically, you need to climb onto those pillars in the ground and make your way up onto the robot. What I like to do is I like to linger in the air for an extra amount of time while Tinker Knight here is switching places. That way I don't actually fall off of the big robot when he kind of dips himself back or dips himself forward when Tinker Knight changes his positions. I did screw up at one point at the very beginning of the robot fight, but I was able to pretty consistently get myself onto the robot after that. No flashback this time. Instead, we'll be seeing what changes there are, and of course, grabbing our next curio. This one is the Barrier Lantern, which kind of reminds me of a certain ability that someone else has in Shovel of Hope and Plague of Shadows. A ring of fireballs to protect you? Kind of familiar. These fireballs are pretty special though. They can deflect projectiles and basically absorb them, giving it some extra power. Once it's absorbed enough, I guess you could say, you can shoot out the fireballs, and they'll basically give the same effect as the Cascade powder from... What was it, Cascade? I don't quite remember. I think it was Cluster Powder from Plague Knight's campaign. A big explosion with a nice radius, and it can do multiple hits. The upgraded version doesn't let you use that cluster ability. Instead it has something different, which actually is better. So we'll upgrade it when we upgrade it. For now, let's talk to Tinker Knight here. And he says something pretty interesting. In fact, all of them are pretty interesting, them being the Order of No Quarter members. They don't seem like they really want to rule anything. At least they don't want to rule with an iron fist. They are kind of cool guys, and playing as them does actually make them feel like cool guys. The armor that I picked up for the next few levels that I'm going to be doing is the Charger Shawl. It allows you to do charge slashes both on the ground, in the air, and while dashing, so your dash slashes can do some extra damage, though it takes longer to charge than Plague Knight's bombs or Shovel Knight's, whatchamacallit, his charged slash. Specter Knight can move around freely while using his charge slash. It's not really as detrimental as Shovel Knight's was. Shovel Knight's slowed down to a very slow crawl. And it's Reese, just the character that I was talking about earlier, with how the Barrier Lantern is similar to his fireball things that he surrounds himself with. And the Enchantress takes a bit of an interest in Reese. Maybe she recognizes him from something? I don't know. Either way, she's doing something special to Reese here, giving him some extra powers and making him all edgy, just like Specter Knight. Very Castlevania-like, you know, after images, which is always pretty cool in my book. What I like to do for Reese is use the Skeletal Sentry, because that's what the challenge makes you use, so that's what I use. Reese is a pretty tough boss if you don't know what you're doing. He has his boomerang thing, which doesn't actually function like a boomerang. Instead, it shoots out projectiles rather than him having two of them. He likes to slash at you when you're coming in for a dash slash or a regular slash, so be careful when approaching him because sometimes he will actually block your attacks and, you know, counterattack with some extra damage. Other attacks include teleporting off screen, reappearing on the ground, and then performing a sort of disappearing slash at you. I don't know how else to describe it. He can also perform a V slash, and depending on where he throws his boomerang, it will actually change its projectiles. When it's on the ground, they travel along the ground and then run up the wall, and if the boomerang hits the wall, then they'll travel up and down the wall and only on the wall. I don't think if they hit the ground, they'll start going horizontally. The reason I decided to change from the Raiment of Risk is because we can't really take advantage of it at this point, especially with this boss fight. It would basically be a regular piece of armor because there's no checkpoint to destroy in order to get us the extra darkness or the extra scythe range. So now, Edgy Reese is going to be taking over the magic mirror here, and going to be constantly staying in that pose. I can stay in that pose as long as you need me to, man. Alright, that's enough.